NBC Nightly News tonight. Good day.
I'm Ryan Hanrahan with this NBC Connecticut special report. We are continuing to monitor the earthquake that struck central Virginia at about 1:50 this afternoon. And that when the earthquake occurred, play was actually stopped, according to the Associated Press, at the New Haven Open at the Connecticut Tennis Center when that earthquake happened. Obviously, out of an overabundance of caution, people not quite sure what exactly happened. They did suspend play at the New Haven Open. The stadium was evacuated during the third game of the match earlier this afternoon once the stadium began shaking, water bottles obviously sloshing back and forth. And of course, the wire copy from the Associated Press says New Haven police and fire officials were checking the structure for damage, though given the fact that the earthquake was so far away, I'm not really expecting any damage here in Connecticut. It would be very difficult to actually get damage. I suppose if you had something teetering on the side of a shelf, it may have fallen over, but that's pretty much just about it. And the impact that you get from something like this will be greater the higher up you are in a building. So say you're in an office building in Hartford or New Haven, you're probably going to feel it a little bit more because those buildings are designed with a sway so they can absorb a shock like that. You may not think of it, but here in Connecticut, the way that you engineer a building is you actually do build in a little bit of sway, so if the earth shakes, the building can move back and forth and not sustain any severe damage. If you remember down in 9/11, when they were talking about the World Trade Center, both towers were designed to take some type of impact and take a sway in either direction, just like they're designed to withstand hurricanes or earthquakes, because seismic activity here in Connecticut is rare, but it's not unheard of. So a lot of times you will get that sway in a building. So if you were up at the 20th or 25th floor of City Place in Hartford or down in New Haven, I'm pretty sure you probably felt the shaking fairly significantly, where if you were planted on the ground with 2 feet down on a sidewalk, you probably didn't feel all that much, but you probably did feel something as well. We're also being told that Pratt & Whitney in East Hartford, they evacuated just out of an abundance of caution. Anytime you feel a shaking like this, especially in this 9/11 world, post 9/11 world, you wonder, what was that? That's why a lot of places in New York City were evacuated. On the way in, I was actually driving with my photographer. We were leaving a story in downtown Hartford. We were driving, didn't feel anything at all in the car, and a lot of times you won't if you're driving in a car, but people were, within moments, turned on the radio listening to one of the AM stations out of New York City, and you could hear that everyone on the island of Manhattan, close enough to that earthquake, felt it, and they were worried, and a lot of buildings there evacuated, including City Hall in lower Manhattan. But again, we're continuing to monitor a 5.9 magnitude earthquake that struck central Virginia, about 35 miles to the northwest of Richmond, Virginia. A very significant earthquake with more significant impacts, it looks like, down to our south. And this is live pictures from Washington, D.C., our sister station WRC down there. And you can see they're flying over, I'm sure, looking for if there was any damage. And again, a 5.9 magnitude quake is certainly significant enough to cause damage where it happened. So in the town of Mineral, Virginia, I'm sure it's quite a small town northwest of Richmond, Virginia. Once you get off I-95 in Virginia, it gets quite rural down there. So at least we're not talking about this happening right next to Washington, D.C. It probably was about 100 miles to the south of Washington, D.C. But in that area, I would expect that there would have been some damage from this earthquake as it moved through. But what everyone's talking about today is here in Connecticut. What happened? Everyone felt it who was standing on the ground, especially in a building here at NBC Connecticut. We felt the tremors. I personally did not, but I was told that it was pretty impressive when that earthquake. You could feel the shaking. You could feel the rumbling. Some people describe it not necessarily as a shaking, but sort of a roll that moves through the ground. So there's all sorts of different ways an earthquake manifests itself. Some of them are extremely violent and extremely short-lived. Others aren't as violent and can spread out in a very, very large direction. You're looking live from Hartford. I'm sure some of those office buildings in Hartford had a little bit of a scare earlier when they felt that shaking, especially, as I mentioned, in the upper floors of skyscrapers. It's much easier to feel that shaking the higher you are in one of those buildings. But again, a 5.9 magnitude earthquake in central Virginia, very, very rare. There has not been one of these, something like this, in decades. There have been very strong earthquakes in the eastern part of North America in the past. There was a very significant earthquake in Charleston, South Carolina. And you'll have to excuse me, my geology is not as good as my meteorology, but I believe it was in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and that was felt from South Carolina all the way up to Montreal and Boston. We know buildings in New York were evacuated, and some buildings in Connecticut were. We've seen people gathering on the green in New Haven as they've probably left their building. Hopefully they can parlay this into an early afternoon home because it is such a beautiful day. Maybe that's why people are still outside. As you take a live look outside from our studio on the green in New Haven, looking at the people gathering there right now on Church Street, saying, you know, sort of figuring out what was going on. And yeah, indeed, this was an earthquake. We do know of damage to our south, but the good news is at this point, no damage reported here in Connecticut. Lisa?
All right, Ryan, I'm joining you now. We have some information coming in the city of New Haven. The mayor is has activated an emergency operations center. I have a little echo in my ear. At 2:50, they will hold a media briefing. That will be in the basement of the emergency operations center. So Mayor DeStefano will tell us more about what's going on in New Haven.
And I know at the New Haven Open, they actually, for a period of time, they canceled play. They suspended play, trying to figure out what exactly was going on. They felt the shaking down at the tennis tournament in New Haven. And a lot of people in New Haven, I assume, probably felt this a little bit more than places further inland because they were closer to this earthquake when it happened. But again, we do have some reports of damage coming into us from the Mid-Atlantic, especially around Washington, D.C. Bradley Airport is accepting flight diversions from JFK because JFK, we're not sure if it was closed or if they tried to take some traffic down, but we do know that Bradley Airport is accepting some incoming flight traffic. So if you are flying today, I would say probably call ahead because the big airports, Newark, LaGuardia, JFK, Philadelphia, Reagan, Dulles, I'm sure we're all impacted by this, and out of abundance of caution, Lisa, they're probably saying better safe than sorry. We'll hold off for a little bit.
Absolutely. Places with a lot of people. Ryan, where were you when this happened?
You know, ironically, we were leaving the we were leaving the Department of Homeland Security in Hartford. I was in the car driving, didn't feel anything. When you're driving on the road, you can't feel these things.
I was driving an old Sabre.
Yeah, you couldn't feel it either.
No,
yeah.
I didn't feel it at all.
And I think it's one of those things, also designed for some level of seismic activity, exactly like we just had. So the buildings can actually sway. Instead of, if you think of it, if you have steel construction like this, if it can't move and it has to absorb the shock, you can get stress on there. But if it can sway, it sort of spreads that stress out across the whole building. So that's why they do that. So that's why you can feel the swaying back and forth. If you're at the top of the GE building, the Chrysler building, the Empire State Building, if you're up 80 floors, that has got to be terrifying feeling up there.
Yeah, I want to just bring you up to date. The network, NBC, is having an update, a special coverage update at 4:01. So we'll be bringing you that, and we'll be bringing you coverage throughout. And of course, live at 5, we'll wrap everything up. We're going to be with you for a few more minutes here leading up to NBC coming in and giving us kind of a national picture. And it's going to be interesting to see what tape they have.
And we're also getting some information. It looks like President Obama will be speaking from Martha's Vineyard at some point. NBC News is expecting him to hold a press conference.
They felt it there.
Yeah, they felt it out there on the Vineyard. They felt it as far north as Toronto, as far south as Atlanta. So this was really a large area that felt this disruption from this earthquake. And I think at this point, the biggest concerns are if you're flying, call ahead because there were ground stops at all the major airports from Dulles straight up to JFK. So there will be some flight issues. And I also think there will probably be some issues with train service, Amtrak especially, heading south from New Haven down toward Washington, D.C., because there were some issues between Baltimore and D.C.
And Ryan, really quick, before we go, people worried about aftershocks.
Yes.
Wrap that up on what we can.
Well, the thing with aftershocks is almost 95% of the time after a big earthquake, you get smaller aftershocks. There's residual stress in the ground. Those are almost always smaller. And the good news is, because they will be smaller and the earthquake happens so far away, I doubt we'll feel them here in Connecticut.
Good.
You may feel them in Washington, D.C., but for there to be an aftershock that we felt in Connecticut, it would have to be one big aftershock.
Good. So that a lot of people were concerned about that today, especially after feeling that today. All right, we want to say goodbye just for now. NBC Nightly News coming on with a special report. We'll bring you more live updates, and we'll see you for Live at 5.